Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Tech Tip Tidbits with Tim here at Studio 21. And today, I have Andrew Barta here again.
Again.
And we're going to talk about those pesky power supply issues. And we're going to have a bunch of real cool tips and explain a bunch of things that, maybe not everybody understands about utilizing the different power sources in the pedals and pretty much any piece of equipment you use. This edition is going to be called Batteries, Wall Warts, and Pedalboard Power Supplies. So first up, batteries. The simplest way to power your stuff. By far the easiest, and they also have their own limitations. So how would you explain that?
Well, I have one here, so we can see how it looks like.
Right on.
Did you ever see one of these?
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Copper top.
They actually the best way to power, but they're expensive because you have to keep buying them. They're bad for the environment. And of course, they always die exactly when they shouldn't, in the middle of the gig, right?
Yeah.
So only a very few people using batteries nowadays, because we also have a pedal board, and you're not going to buy like 12 batteries for each of your pedals. But we need to talk about it. Let's say you have like a showcase. You're playing 2 songs with your band, and you have like a fly rig or some smaller pedal like this one here, okay? And maybe they don't have phantom power. So here's a little gadget that we actually sell that you can plug in your battery externally and power the unit. And look at that, ta-da, it's on. So batteries still have a function, when you need to power something really quickly. You don't want to have a long cable to find like AC outlet somewhere on the stage.
Right.
So it really helps with that. But let's face it, most of the time it will be a power supply.
Right. Now, is there a difference between advantages of using batteries with digital pedals as opposed to analog pedals?
Well, here's the thing. Digital pedals, most of them are very power hungry, so they're going to consume the batteries really quickly. Some of them within an hour or two, you kill your battery. Analog products like this one can last for several gigs with the same battery. So
True story.
I guess you experienced it. Yes, but there are some analog pedals that actually also consume a lot of power. For example, delay lines and delay pedals and chorus pedals, because those chips are very power hungry as well.
Right.
So I wouldn't recommend to use batteries with them, because then you're going to go through a lot of batteries.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the battery aspect of things. Now on to the wall warts.
Okay, our favorites, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a couple here. All right. This is our old one. It's an analog one.
Right.
The way you can tell that they're much heavier, they have a transformer inside.
Right.
These little buggers also have a transformer, but they're very tiny because they work on a higher frequency.
Okay.
So you don't have to put that much copper in it and expensive materials. And again, some of them has advantages and the other one has disadvantages. But nowadays, it's almost impossible to buy an analog power supply. So we're going to talk about mostly of the digital ones, and this is our old one, and the newer one we use now.
The DC9.
The DC9 is 9 volts, and you can actually change the blade on it, really simply by removing it. So you can go with different countries, have different plugs. And the other interesting thing, we were talking about this today, that you didn't even know what this little thing here.
I had no idea.
Right? Most people don't. What it is actually it's a filter. It filters out high frequency radio frequencies, because a digital power supply has a lot of those.
Okay.
And you're not necessarily going to hear this or the difference without it. But to pass the FCC test, you need that, because nowadays there's so many different equipment and they all have to work with each other.
Right.
So that's why this little thing is on it. And that's the current power supply. Now we have to talk about voltage and amperage.
Right. Well, volts and millivolts.
Right. It's an interesting thing, volts and millivolts. That the volts you have to get very close to what you need. So when it's a 9-volt pedal, should have a 9-volt power supply. The amperage is a totally different story, because what is amperage actually means how much power you need to put into that pedal. And if the pedal takes only 5 milliamp like ours, there's no 5 milliamp power supply.
Right.
They start around 100 to 200. That's the smallest one, but it doesn't hurt the unit because it just takes as much power as it needs, okay? However, the opposite, when you need a really high amperage, like some of the digital pedals, let's say they could be 1,000 milliamp, right? Then if you use a power supply that says 200 milliamp, now you have a problem.
Right.
Because it cannot supply all that power. So the bottom line is what you need to do is to match at least the minimum that your pedal has posted on. Sometimes it says 500 milliamp. So you have to have at least 500 milliamp available in the power supply. With the voltage, getting back to that, again, you have to match that and be very careful not to have more than that, because some of these modern power supplies, they can provide you 18 volts, but a lot of pedals, they can't handle it. And guess what's going to happen?
The magic smoke.
That's right. And we can't put that back in the bottle.
No, you can't put the magic smoke back in. Everybody knows that. Or they found out one way or another.
That's right.
Right?
So you have to be very careful not to overpower it. And the other one is to pay attention if it's an AC or a DC power supply that you need. You don't want to mix those either, because that can also cause quite a bit of problems.
Right. And there's multiple, tip, ring, sleeve, configurations.
That's right. That's correct. Interestingly enough, in our business, MI, musical instrument business, we have a negative center. There's a reason for it. I can get into it why. But most other products like calculators and cameras, they usually center positive.
Oh boy.
Okay, so that can cause a lot of headaches that you buy a power supply off the internet and it says 9 volt and it says the right amperage, you plug it in, you still smoke because the polarity is wrong.
It can't go the other way?
Well, it can.
But it winds up at the smoke factory.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
right.
As a matter of fact, there's a cute little thing we do in our pedals. All of our pedals has a little self-healing fuse inside.
Yes.
So instead of smoking the pedal, what that little fuse does, it goes, it kind of blows, but if you unplug the wrong power supply, it heals itself. It's a new
really
technology that we incorporate in all of the pedals now to try to save the headache of sending it back to us to fix it.
Yeah. You get a built-in do-over.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So if
so don't do it again.
That's right.
Right.
So, but you have to be very careful with the polarity.
Yeah.
And the reason is actually we have the negative center in a MI because when you use it with the battery, there's an internal reason how you can switch the battery easily with the input jack, but you need to have a negative center.
Oh,
so
okay.
This goes back to the early 70s, when, all the major manufacturers adapted that system. It's no reason to really get to the nitty-gritty of it, but that's how it is.
It's the industry standard.
And we don't want to change it because that's another thing. Like us, as a manufacturer, we looked at previous pedals and we didn't want to have, again, a reverse polarity.
Right.
So then let's say you have a Boss power supply and you plug it into ours and it's smoking. That's not a good thing.
No.
So we matched whatever the other companies were doing.
Yeah. Well, that's good because a lot of times you reach into your bag, you grab something.
That's right. And we actually do recommend sometime, like if you're on the road and you need a power supply, you can buy a Boss power supply because they're very high quality, well manufactured. I'm against like unknown brands because you never know what you're getting.
Yeah.
But Boss is a well-known brand, been around for a long time, and we tested them many times with our pedals and they always work.
Yeah, sometimes trying to save a dime will cost you $1.
Or
many dollars.
$100. That's right.
All right, regulated and unregulated.
Well, regulated.
I hear both of those terms a lot.
Right, but actually, I was just thinking about this when we looked at the, what we're going to talk about today, and the unregulated stuff is actually going away. The regulated power supply was a brief period between the early power supplies that were always analog and unregulated. And then people realized that when you use a power supply into different units and they're unregulated, it's going to be widely fluctuating the voltage because it's dependent on how much power you're pulling out. So, and it's also the regulated power supplies were way quieter because all the ripple was removed. But we don't have to deal with this anymore because almost every company now makes digital power supplies, and they, by their nature, are regulated. So when you hear about regulated or unregulated, it's probably not going to come up if you buy a new power supply. It's only about the
Right,
old
so
ones.
most of the modern stuff, you know, you wouldn't have to worry about that.
No.
Now, is there any pedals that require either?
Well, you never require unregulated. Yes, actually, this is a funny story that we have like a Boss pedal or a DS1, and it's the most sensitive for bad power supplies.
Yeah.
Like it starts to hum or squeal and all that. Even with some digital power supplies that are not good quality,
Right.
that's how we test them, that you plug it in and you get this awful noise because the DS1 didn't have much filtering on the inside. So whatever you plugged into, it came through. And if it's an unregulated, then you get a lot of 50 or 60 cycle hum, depending on what country you are in. So that's our little testing, because in our products, we try to make it work with everything. So we have more filtering in it and more electronics to make it work with a much wider range of power supplies.
Okay.
But yeah, regulated power supply is always a better one. But nowadays, all the digital ones are regulated.
Cool. Yeah, that cleared up a lot of stuff for me, I'll tell you that.
Good.
You hear the words and sometimes you just don't, you know, sometimes you just don't put it together.
Well,
you know, you think you know what it means until you hear what it actually means. All right.
And
so
then when we have this thing here.
that's where I was going. We were going to move on to pedal boards.
Yeah, we happen to have one here. So most people use these. And I recommend it highly, you know, as long as it's a known brand, because we've seen some unknown brands that provided voltages that were not in the ballpark.
Right. Saving a dime again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the cheap way is one of these spaghettis.
I am guilty of using that. I use a, I think it's a one spot, you know, and I have a daisy chain like that, and it goes to my rolling pedals, my PK5 keyboard pedals, then to my effects and all that stuff. And I just find it easier. But,
Absolutely.
you know, sometimes I run into noise issues, and my rolling Taurus pedals are very sensitive to power.
Right.
And sometimes, you know, I'll be at a show playing and all the lights will flash once, and I know I'm in trouble at that point.
That's
you
right.
know, so
Well, here's the thing. We talked about amperage. So when you daisy chain, then you have to add up all the individual pedals' amperage.
and that's what I learned. So I don't do that anymore.
That's right, because probably your power supply was not big enough to power them all.
Yeah.
So let's say you have, you know, 300 milliamp, that's 300 already, and then one 500. Now you have 800 milliamps. So you need to have at least 800 or 1,000 milliamp power supply, or even more. But these babies, they have a lot of power in them.
Yep.
So that's one thing you eliminate as a trouble spot. The next one is that these are isolated from individually from each other. What does that mean? That means that the grounds are not the same, because when you use one of these, you're already grounding all your pedals through your audio line. And this one provides an other ground. Guess what that's going to form?
A ground loop.
And what the loop does is basically it's an antenna to pick up hum and environmental noise. So now you're going to have a working board that sounds really bad, because there's a lot of hiss, hum, you know, all kind of side effects that, you know, is not musical. So that's why I'm against it. It's good in a pinch when you need to do something, and sometimes you get away with it.
Yeah.
You know, but sometimes not. So I rather recommend to spend an extra $100 or so and have the individual.
Yep. That's what I'm looking at.
Yep.
You know, I'm looking at that for a solution. For
Now here's another
my
problem with
upcoming
these
thing.
babies. They sometimes have different voltages, and you
Yes.
don't want to mix that. So somebody at the office upstairs had a nice idea to use color-coded, like you can have like a tape, and color code the individual ones with different voltage so you don't mix them up. That's the best way to blow out your pedals. To mix it up.
Absolutely. You know, especially when you're setting up in live situations or a studio, you know, where it's kind of dim, you know, you can't see what you're doing. And if it provides 18 volts and nothing on your board accepts 18 volts, you know,
Yeah.
why
Then
even
tape it up.
Why even allow yourself? Yeah,
That's a hole you don't want to plug into.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Even on your birthday.
Yeah.
No, I have components like my laptops and stuff like that I use for the keyboards. That I have, you know, bright green tape on the power.
There you go.
Because I can't tell you how many times I plugged my power supply into something that's not a power supply.
Exactly.
You know, and that voltage has to go somewhere. You know,
it always does.
It's a momentary mistake that has a long-term
But it's
effect.
still better if it goes into your pedal than
Yeah.
if it goes into you. And we can talk about that one day
Right.
too,
Yeah.
about grounding your equipment
Oh, absolutely.
and being safe.
Yeah. Okay, so we got the daisy chain connector out of the way. What's left?
Not much.
Yeah, I think we covered it all.
Well, the safety, as I said, like the grounding
Why don't you
of
touch
your
on that?
equipment. Yeah, because it's kind of part of this that it can cause a ground loop. However, I highly recommend not ever cutting or lifting the ground on your amplifier, because now you're going to have a floating unit that could have high voltage on it and it could kill
You
you.
mean like those little plugs that, you know,
That's
you
not
use
the
in a
way to
pinch?
get rid of a ground loop,
It may be the way to get rid of a guitar player.
for sure,
Right?
if he's playing out of tune. But we don't recommend that either.
No.
No.
Surely we jest.
Yeah. So I guess that's pretty much covers it. So
Okay.
the cell phones is not only that shouldn't put on your amplifier, but don't wear it, because your guitar pickup or bass pickup gonna pick up your phone not only when it rings, but even when it communicates in the background. And how many times we got customers calling us that something is wrong with our equipment, and it turned out it was their cell phone.
Well, as many of us do these days, we record at home, okay? And I am never far from my cell phone while I'm recording at home with my laptop.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times all of a sudden you get that tick, tick, tick.
That's
tick,
right.
tick, tick,
And
tick
not
coming
even a
through.
phone call, yeah. It's
And
just
it-
the communication, yeah.
It took me forever to
figure
figure
it
that
out.
out. I didn't know what it was.
That's
You
right.
know, I'm plugging plugs in and changing
Yeah.
things, buying a new interface. Yeah, that familiar little tick, 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 tick. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
learned to keep that away from anything I was doing.
Yeah. So, well, that's it then for today.
Yeah, well, thank you from Andrew and myself for joining us. And don't forget, down in the comments section below, give us your questions, and we'll feature it in an episode of Tech Tips
That's
in the near
right.
future. You know, we're always looking to hear from you guys on what interests you, and we'll handle it. Well, thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.